Welcome to my channel, HFY Humanity. Let's begin. My name is Vreth-Olon, Senior Observer of the Galactic Assembly, and I am filing this report under protest, not because I was ordered to write it, not because the Assembly demanded documentation, but because, frankly, what I witnessed was so monumentally ridiculous, so aggressively improbable, and so deeply personally offensive to every logical framework I have spent 400 years building that I need someone else to read it and confirm that I did not malfunction. The species in question is called human. You have heard of them maybe. Little wet things, bilateral symmetry, soft, disgustingly exposed skin with no thermal plating, no radiation shielding, no subdermal armor of any kind. They live on a rock that tried to kill them with ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid collisions, and roughly 14,000 of their own diseases, and yet here we are. Here they are, still moving, still loud, still inexplicably smiling. I was assigned to monitor Sector Von 9, which includes the third planet of a rather unremarkable yellow star. My assignment was supposed to be quiet. It was supposed to be a rotation of passive data collection. The kind of work you give to an observer who has upset their supervisor, which, yes, is what happened to me. But that is not relevant to this report. For the first 40 of their years, I watched from distance. I catalogued their wars, their politics, their extraordinary habit of building something magnificent and then immediately arguing about who owned it. I noted their biology: fragile, inefficient, laughably short-lived. Their average lifespan at the time of first observation was, by assembly standards, barely a coffee break, and yet the first incident that made me sit up, literally in my observation pod, occurred during what they call a space race. Two of their nations, both pointing weapons at each other with great enthusiasm, decided simultaneously that the correct response to mutual hatred was to see who could throw a metal ball into orbit first. Not to talk, not to negotiate, to throw things into space, competitively. I contacted my colleague Sefa Moore, Senior Observer of Sector Dal 12. I said to her, "Sefa, these creatures are going to kill themselves within a generation." She agreed. We moved the probability marker to 94% extinction within 100 years. We logged it, we moved on. They did not move on. They threw the metal ball, then they threw a bigger one. Then, and this is the part that made Sefa drop her observation tablet, they threw themselves, actual living ones, inside a small pressurized container with a fire underneath it. The fire was on purpose. The fire was the plan. The human they sent was named Orla Kovac, a small, calm individual from a cold country who reportedly ate a meal, kissed a photograph of their family, and then sat on top of enough explosive force to rearrange a small mountain, and said, "Ready, ready. I want you to absorb that. I want you to sit with it, the way I had to sit with it, at 3 in the morning of my observation cycle, staring at my screens with what I can only describe as existential confusion." They reached their moon. 12 of them walked on it. One of them, a human named Dex Aldrin, hit a small white ball with a stick while standing on the lunar surface and watched it sail into the distance with what eyewitness audio confirmed was visible satisfaction. He brought a stick to the moon. For recreation, on purpose. I updated the extinction probability. I moved it to 71%. The Assembly was not concerned. The Assembly said, and I quote their official summary, "Primitive species demonstrate exploratory behavior consistent with pre-collapse pattern. Recommend continued passive monitoring." Passive monitoring. As if these creatures were algae. As if algae had ever looked at the void between stars and said, "I wonder what is over there, and also, can I beat someone to it?" The following decades were, I will be honest with you, deeply humbling for me professionally. They built stations in orbit. Actual stations where they lived, which seems unnecessary and excessive until you realize they were practicing for something larger. They did not know what exactly. Several of their own scientists argued publicly about which direction to go next. One proposed the red planet next door. Another said no, the ice moons. A third wrote an entire, published document suggesting they aim for everything all at once on the grounds that waiting was for species with more time. They did not have much time. They knew it. They went anyway. The extinction marker fell to 60%, then 50. Then I stopped updating it because at some point, the probability tool started feeling less like science and more like personal embarrassment. Sci-Fi called me. She said nothing at first. Then she said, "Vreth, are you watching the launch window?" I was watching. 3 ships, not probes, not unmanned instruments. Ships with crews, provisions, medical units, and I noticed with a slow, creeping dread, planting equipment. They were not exploring, they were moving in. So there I was. Vreth-Olon, senior observer, 4 centuries of field experience, 17 commendations from the assembly, sitting in my observation pod eating cold nutrition paste, watching 3 human ships crawl toward the red planet next. Door like they owned it, which, to be absolutely clear, they did not. Because the assembly had not granted them any territorial designation beyond their home world, because the assembly had not thought it necessary, because the assembly had looked at humans and said, "Oh, they will sort themselves out eventually," and by sort themselves out, they meant stop existing. The assembly was, to use a human expression I have since learned, dead wrong. The first ship landed. The crew stepped out in their suits. Those wonderfully absurd inflated suits that make them look like large, soft, walking eggs. And the first human to touch that red soil was a woman named Petra Moll. She knelt down, pressed one gloved hand into the ground, and stood back up. Then she said, into the recording equipment, for all of history to hear, "Took us long enough. Took us long enough." Not, "What an achievement." Not, "We dedicate this moment to all who sacrificed." Those came later in the official speech, delivered by someone in a suit with better lighting. But the first real words, the unscripted ones, were impatience. Pure, unfiltered human impatience. A species that had only recently figured out indoor plumbing on a cosmic timeline was annoyed it had not gotten to Mars sooner. I filed an immediate report to the assembly. The assembly responded in 14 days, which is actually fast for them. And their response was, "Noted. Continue observation." I considered, briefly, requesting a transfer. I did not, because by that point, I will admit something that I have told no other observer, and I am only including it here because this is a sealed report. I was curious. Genuinely, uncomfortably, professionally compromising curious. I wanted to see what they did next. What they did next was argue. There were factions on their homeworld. There are always factions on human homeworlds, because humans apparently cannot agree on anything without first forming a committee, splitting the committee, arguing with the split committee, and then doing whatever the loudest individual suggested. In the first place, some said the red planet was too expensive. Some said it was not enough. Some said they should be fixing their original planet first. A man named Kyo Price, who described himself as an economist, wrote a very long article explaining mathematically why the whole project was unsustainable. The article was widely read. It was completely ignored. The ships kept going. This, I would later come to understand, is the central mechanism of human civilization. The concern is raised. The concern is valid. The concern is noted with great seriousness. And then the thing happens anyway, because there is always one group of humans who read the concern and thought, yes, but what if we did it faster? By the time the third generation of their Mars colony was born, the Assembly convened a formal session about Sector Von 9. I was called to present my findings. I stood before 11 senior adjudicators of the Galactic Convergence, beings who had watched civilizations rise and dissolve across 1 billion years of recorded history, and I said the following words: "They are not stopping." Silence. Senior adjudicator Rotanis, who is older than my star system and looks it, leaned forward and said, "Clarify." I pulled up the data. Population expansion, upward. Resource extraction, expanding. Ship construction, accelerating. Colony foundations, 3 confirmed, 2 in progress, 1 that was technically illegal under their own laws, but was proceeding regardless because the individual behind it had simply left before anyone could stop him, which is apparently a legal grey area when you are moving to a different planet. They are not consolidating, I said. They are not pausing to stabilize. They are not waiting for permission. They are not waiting for anything. They have identified every obstacle between themselves and the outer system, and they are treating each obstacle as a scheduling problem. Rotanis said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "What is their current threat classification?" "Irrelevant," I said. "They are not aggressive toward other species. They do not know other species exist yet. They are doing all of this to themselves, by themselves, for reasons that, when I review their cultural documentation, appear to involve both scientific ambition and a collective psychological inability to sit still." Another adjudicator, Failvor, young by Assembly standards at only 260, raised a hand. "Are you suggesting we make contact?" "I am suggesting," I said carefully, "that we consider making contact before they make it for us. Because if the trajectory continues, and I see no mechanism by which it does not continue, they will reach the outer belt within 4 of their generations. They will reach their system's edge within 8. And when they do, they will find our monitoring stations." The room went very quiet. "And when they find our monitoring stations," I continued, because at this point I had nothing left to lose, "they will take them apart to see how they work, build something similar but larger, and ask us why we did not introduce ourselves sooner. They will not be angry. That is the part I need the Assembly to understand. They will not be afraid. They will be curious, and then they will invite themselves to everything." Rotanis looked at me for a very long time. "You sound almost fond of them, Observer Vreth-Olon." I straightened. I picked up my data tablet. I said with complete professionalism, "I sound like someone who has watched a species outpace every extinction model we have ever built, colonize a second world while still arguing about the first one, send a man to the moon with a sports stick, and name their fastest ship after a woman who said, and I quote, 'Took us long enough.'" I paused. "I sound like someone who thinks the void should introduce itself before it gets introduced." The Assembly approved first contact protocols 4 months later. The lead human delegate, chosen by their unified planetary council, was a historian named Sable Orin, 71 years old, white-haired, with a reputation for being, in the words of her own government's briefing document, impossible to rattle. She stepped into the Assembly chamber. She looked at 11 alien beings representing the oldest governing body in the known galaxy. She looked at me. She looked back at them. Then she sat down, folded her hands, and said, "All right. What took you so long?" I looked at Rotanis. Rotanis looked at me, and for the first time in 4 centuries of observation I laughed. The void had learned patience, yes. It had watched and waited and calculated and deliberated across the long silence of space. But patience, it turned out, was never going to be enough. Not against a species that looked at the infinite dark between the stars, felt nothing but impatience, and said simply that they were ready. They were always ready. That was the terrifying part. That was also, I am now willing to admit, the magnificent part. End of story.